Hey, so on this episode of Education, I want to talk a bit about the long-term consequences of having bulimia. This is something that has been requested multiple times, so sorry it took me so long to get on it, but I'm finally doing the video. So I've had to think about this, and I've decided that this video should be split up into more than one video. So in this one, I want to talk about the long-term consequences of vomiting, and in at least one more video, I want to talk about the long-term consequences of overusing laxatives, as well as binge eating. So let's see how it goes. And if you've got any other suggestions, just please leave your ideas in the comment section below. I'm not going to cover the general long-term consequences of having an eating disorder because I've already covered that in a previous video. I'll leave that in the description below. But if there's anything else that you want me to cover, just please let me know. Okay, so when it comes to vomiting, there are a few areas that you need to consider. Uh, the first and most obvious being your gastrointestinal system, i.e., everywhere that extends from your mouth all the way to your bottom. The next part that you need to consider are your sort of the um, the epidermal linings, i.e., your skin, your hair, your teeth, your nails, and the another area that you need to think about is the chemical changes that are occurring in your blood. So when it comes to your gastrointestinal system, the first area that you think about is your mouth. So when you vomit, the aside from the food that you're getting rid of, you're obviously getting rid of a lot of hydrogen ions, which are extremely acidic, i.e., a low pH. And low pH is extremely irritant to any part of your body except for your stomach, and that is because your stomach is quite specialized in that it has cells that produce mucus, which forms a nice little barrier against the hydrogen ions, as well as there's also bicarbonate ions that are actively secreted into that mucus layer, and bicarbonate plus acid essentially neutralizes one another. So you've got this nice sort of protective barrier against the hydrogen ions. Also, there's a clever little mechanism where the blood runs into the lining of the stomach, picks up any excess hydrogen ions, and leaves. So you've got this sort of countercurrent mechanism. So it's quite clever. However, the rest of your body isn't really specialized like this, so they're a lot less tolerant to the effects of hydrogen ions. So when it comes to your mouth, the first thing that you can think about is the hydrogen ions irritating the lining, causing ulcers, and these can be extremely painful. I've seen some really horrific ones that have just involved basically the whole of the mouth, and these people were in so much pain that they had to be on so many painkillers. The other way that you can get sores in your mouth from bulimia is through malnutrition, and this is a sort of a general sign that we're told to look for as doctors, which is indicative of things like B12 deficiency, iron deficiency, and these tend to occur in the corners of your mouth, and is called angular stomatitis. The next area that you need to think about are your teeth. I'm sure you don't need me to tell you this, but when the hydrogen ions are in your mouth, they cause wearing of the enamel, and hence you get tooth decay, cavities as well. Again, I've seen the extreme end of the spectrum in hospital, where people who have been bulimic for years and years, they've essentially lost all of their teeth, and they're having to wear dentures at the good old age of 20. It's not pretty, and this is something that you can reverse if you get on top of it quick enough. However, once the tooth starts decaying, you're fighting a losing battle, and ultimately that tooth is going to have to come out, unfortunately. The next area, going a bit further down, is the pharynx or the throat. So again, this is down to the hydrogen ions causing irritation, and this causes inflammation because the area is irritated. And inflammation is just a fancy word to mean swelling, and swelling is due to a innate immune response, i.e., something that's pre-programmed to basically cover all the bases, and it results in swelling, a lot of blood going to that area so that the inflammatory cells can get into the area, mucus overproduction, a lot of pain, and it can also cause bleeding as well, because the stomach acid can be so irritant and corrosive that it essentially breaks down the layers, causing blood to come out. This can be extremely painful, and it is reversible though. The next main area is the esophagus, which a lot of people would call their gullet. And again, the hydrogen ions can cause esophagitis, which is just inflammation of the esophagus, which I won't cover much of. But the more important things that vomiting can cause is something called a Mallory Weiss tear. A Mallory Weiss tear is a tear in the most superficial aspect of the esophagus. I've got a little drawing here. So if that's your esophagus there, it's just a cross section. There's the centre where the food goes down, and that's the wall. It's divided into a number of layers: the mucosa, the lamina propria, the submucosa, the muscularis externa, and the serosa. The mucosa is formed by a stratified squamous epithelium. Stratified meaning more than one layer. Squamous meaning flattened cells, which I've tried to draw there. The lamina propria is the next one down. Submucosa is full of connective tissue and also a number of glands. The muscularis externa, muscularis meaning muscle and externa meaning external, is the muscular layer of the esophagus which allows the food to go down. So when you get a Mallory Weiss tear, you essentially just tear this aspect, the mucosa of the esophagus, and this occurs with prolonged bouts of vomiting, and it can cause bleeding and is generally really painful. The more severe end of that spectrum is something called I can never pronounce it, but Borhave syndrome. And you see this? Borhave syndrome is essentially you rupture the entire lining of the esophagus. That is ultimately life-threatening, and this is because not only do you get the tear, but bleeding occurs into the space around the esophagus. Air can enter into a place where there shouldn't be air, causing something called Hammond's sign, which, if you put a stethoscope over the area, it sounds like a sort of your feet going through snow, like sort of crunching, and that's the air as going across as you're breathing. The more potentially life-threatening aspect is bacteria can enter into the area around the esophagus, causing infection, abscess formation, and if that bacteria enters the blood, you're in the realms of getting sepsis, which is where the bacteria in the blood causing infections throughout your body. That's life-threatening because it can cause something called hypovolemic shock. Hypo meaning low, volemic meaning volume, and shock. So yeah, that's the more severe end of the spectrum. The next area in the esophagus is something I alluded to here, and it's where the stratified squamous epithelium of the esophagus gets converted into something called into a columnar epithelium, which is glandular, and this is something that you see in the stomach, but it shouldn't be in the esophagus. And this change is called metaplasia, and essentially just means a change in cell type from one to another. This is called Barrett's esophagus, and you commonly see it in people with esophageal reflux disease. And the problem with this, you may not think of it as a problem, but metaplasia is a precursor to something called dysplasia, dys meaning inappropriate, and dysplasia is a precursor to cancer. And I have seen one case of someone while I was in, working as a student doctor, of a person who had bulimia for many years, got Barrett's esophagus, and ultimately got esophageal cancer. The problem with esophageal cancer is it's not a very nice cancer to have. Out of all of them, only a third of them are treatable curatively, i.e., two-thirds of them are treated with non-curative intent, and after appropriate staging, not all of that one third can actually be cured. So it's not a very nice cancer, and people do die from it. So yeah, that's one thing that you need to keep in mind. I know cancer isn't one of the things that are on your mind, but it is something that can occur.